Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our objective for today is that students will be able to determine a growth factor when given a growth rate and vice versa. Okay, so we have already seen the word growth factor. Growth rate is new vocabulary that we're going to learn today. We're going to see that it's actually very close to a growth factor, and we can go back and forth depending on the problem to figure out what's the growth rate or what's the growth factor. Okay. So yesterday we saw two different examples of the price of a stamp that was increasing over time, right? But instead of giving a growth factor, it told us that the stamp was increasing at a certain percentage every year. So first we said that the stamp was increasing at a rate of 6% every year. And then later on, you did a second example, just to practice, where we said it was increasing at a rate of 4% every year. Now, eventually we figured out that it was exponential growth and that there was a growth factor. But when you see a problem that specifies a percentage increase, we refer to that as a growth rate. So in both of those scenarios, both the 4% and the 6%, we refer to as the growth rate of the exponential relationship, right? So a lot of times, depending on what type of problem you're looking at, you might see a growth rate instead of a growth factor. So usually this happens when you're talking about finance, you're talking about the value of something, or you're talking about investments. That's where you see a growth rate instead of a growth factor because it's more natural to talk about that thing, okay? So just to review, these were the two tables that we should have seen yesterday. So the stamp started off with a value of 2,500 in both of these scenarios. The one on the left-hand side had that 6% interest rate, so the growth rate was 6%. The one on the right-hand side had a growth rate of 4%. And what we went and did was we found out what the growth factor was, right? So the growth factor in this case was 1.06. The way that we found that is, remember, you always divide successive terms. So to find this growth factor, I would do 2,650 divided by 2,500, and if you put that in a calculator, I see I get 1.06. So sorry if that's hard to see, but it says 1.06. That's my growth factor, right? Now, again, I could do that with any two terms. I could also do this one here, 3,345.56 divided by the term above it, 3,156.19. And again, I'm going to get a growth factor of 1.06, right? So you can use any two values. Typically, it's easy if you just use the top two, right? That's going to be the fastest way to do it. Same thing over here. To find this growth factor of 1.04, you divide 2,600 by 2,500. That gives us the growth factor of 1.04, right? So the growth factor is easier to use when you're making your table, because instead of doing that slow approach that we did yesterday where you have to take this, multiply by 0.04, and then add the original, all I have to do is to go from, say, year 5 to year 6. Now that I know this is my growth factor, year 6 is just going to be this number here, 3,041.63 times my growth factor of 1.04. That's going to be the faster way of filling out that table then. Okay, so sometimes in these questions you see a growth rate, and the idea is that you want to be able to figure out how do I find the growth factor without having to make this entire table and do all that hard work. Okay, so that's what you're going to practice doing today. Now the way that you're going to do it is first you're going to look at a couple of examples. So 3 examples at the bottom. I have the table, I tell you what the growth rate is, you're going to find the growth factor. So let me just show you an example of how to do it here. So again, easy to find the growth factor. All I need to do is I need to divide, right, the value of 1 year by the value of the year before it. So I'm going to look at the value at this year, that's $1,680, divided by the value of the year above it, $1,500. So in this case here, I have 1,680 divided by That is 1,500. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to be able to see my screen here, but that gave me a value of 1.12. And if you wanted to, you can check that, right? 1,500 multiplied by 1.12 gives me this value. So this is my growth factor, and it does work with any two values, right? Again, I could do this number divided by the one above it. I'm still going to get 1.12, okay? So my growth factor was 1.12. My growth rate was 12%, right? You should be seeing a pattern. Same thing over here. My growth rate was 6%. My growth factor was 1.06. Over here, growth rate 4%. Growth factor 1.04. So first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna figure out the growth factor by just dividing the value here by the value here, right? Write the growth factor here, here, and here. And then the idea is you're gonna see what relationship do you see between the growth rate and the growth factor, right? Pause the video, work out those steps, look back at the example I did here if you're confused. Now, once you've done that, you're gonna answer this question here. It says, examine your work from the previous page, explain how you can find the growth factor if you know the growth rate. So in your own words, I'm not gonna tell you how to do this, right? Based on what you see here, right? If you know the growth rate is 23%, what should the growth factor be even if you didn't have a table? How could you figure that out, right? So if I said the growth rate was like, say, 13%, how would you figure out what the growth factor is if you didn't have a table, right? What relationship do you see between those numbers? Write that out there in your own words. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna look at these given growth rates and you're gonna write down what you think the growth factor should be, okay? After you're done with that, you're gonna try to go in reverse and you're gonna figure out if you know the growth factor, what should the growth rate be? And again, just to remind you of the relationships we saw so before, the growth factor was 1.06. That gave us a growth rate of 6%. Growth factor is 1.04. Tells us the growth rate is 4%. Growth factor of 1.12 gives us a growth rate of 12%. So now this is going in the opposite direction. If you know the growth factor, what will the growth rate be? Try to write that out in your own words. What process do you think you would take to find that? And then finally on the back page, you're gonna do the opposite of what you did before. Given these growth factors, the idea is for you to find the growth rate for each of these, right? And remember, the growth rate is always gonna be a certain percent. So that's telling you by what percent is it increasing, right? After you finish, come to the Zoom session. I will help assist you, answer any questions that you have. All right, that's it for today. If you finish all that early, push yourself section is just an example of exponential growth that is giving you a growth rate, right? Rates have percentages, factors don't. So good luck. I will see you during the Zoom session.